In January 1998, Suharto gave in and signed the IMF agreement, watched over by the head of the IMF, Michel Candaçu. Indonesia received a massive loan to stabilize the economy. For a moment it worked, but then the strangest thing happened.
Indonesia's currency has collapsed, losing 80% of its value, and the economy is in ruins. With riots and looting breaking out across the country, there are fears that it's now on the brink of anarchy.
Indonesia's exchange rate crashed disastrously, and the economy went into freefall. But Indonesia was not alone. In every country that the IMF bailed out, like Thailand and South Korea, for a moment there was stability, and then the exchange rate collapsed. Rubin's critics in the White House began to argue that there was another agenda also at work in the bailouts, that part of their real function was to rescue the Western investors, not the countries. Billions of dollars were paid into the Asian banks by the IMF, but many of those same dollars were immediately used to pay off Western investors who wanted to get their money out of the country. And once that had happened, the economy crashed.
It was another illustration that the interest of the financial community dominated over other interests by providing mega-billion-dollar loans. The IMF was bailing out the Western investors and leaving the taxpayers in the countries further in debt because they had to repay the IMF.
The effect of the cuts was devastating throughout the region. In Indonesia, government subsidies were removed as instructed by the Western bankers. Prices soared, and within months, in a country of 200 million people, 15% of the male workforce lost their jobs. Economic output fell by 14%. As Robert Rubin had wanted, Suharto was forced from power, but at a very high price. The economy now lay in ruins, and ethnic and religious strife began. The same thing happened in Thailand and South Korea. Millions and millions of people fell back into the poverty that they thought they had escaped forever. By the middle of 1998, the Asian economies had collapsed. It was the most catastrophic economic disaster suffered by any countries since the Depression of the 1930s.
Many people cannot have the money, don't have the money. Many millions of people are unemployed. They don't have the job, they don't have the education. Education is expensive, hospital is expensive, everything is expensive for the common people.
Monica Lewinsky says that while you were in the Oval Office area, you touched her breast, would she be lying?
Bill Clinton had become president with the vision of using political power to transform America. But he had been persuaded to give away that power to the financial markets, with the promise that this time they would create a new kind of stability, a new kind of democracy, free of the corruption of elite politics. But it was now becoming clear that in reality, America's political power had just been transferred to another elite, the financiers and Wall Street. And when faced by a crisis, they had simply used that power to rescue themselves. In the process, far from creating stability, their actions were leading to a chaotic and far more unstable world. To the leaders of the Asian countries, this was just as much a corruption of power as anything their governments were guilty of.
Power corrupts. As much as government can become corrupt when invested with absolute power, markets also can become corrupt when equally absolutely powerful. We are seeing the effect of that absolute power today, the impoverishment and misery of millions of people and their eventual slavery.
What did you tell your cabinet, Mr. President?
Ask him.
Are you considering...
Do you think it went well?
Are you considering resignation, Mr. President?
Okay, I don't know if you saw that. Right, Catherine, are you that was a Northwest comment?
Did you see that look on his face? Great, great.
Come in.
I love you, Rourke. Would it please you to hear that I've lived in torture all these months? Hoping never to find you again and wishing to give my life just to see you once more. You knew that, of course. That's what you wanted me to live through.
Yes.
Why don't you laugh at me now? You won. I had no pride left to stop me. I love you without dignity, without regret. I came to tell you this. And to tell you that you'll never see me again.
By now I've had a lot of time to think. I'm 4 years older, 5 years older, and I realize I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. But the trouble is, I have become very, very important to Ayan. She tells me, you are my lifeline to reality. I don't know how I would have survived without you. You started the Nathaniel Branden Institute. That's how the whole philosophical movement of Ayn Rand got launched, was by this institute I created. So my idol is telling me every day, I'm her lifeline to reality. I don't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. And then a young woman comes to my lectures, and I meet her, and I fall in love with her. And now the situation has got even worse.
She then launched into a tirade against him that was so shocking, accusing him of utter irrationality, of betraying objectivism, betraying her. It went on and indefinitely. And it ended with her saying, if he had an ounce of morality left, he would be impotent for the next 10 years, and then slapped him across the face 3 times and said, get out. He got out. And that was the end. And ultimately ended it in absolute disaster for everybody.
Ayn Rand's anger and despair destroyed the small, perfect world that she had built around her. The collective was torn apart by the revelation of her affair and by her violent reaction at her betrayal. And by the early 1970s, Ayn Rand was left almost alone. She still lived in her apartment by the Empire State Building, and she took up stamp collecting. One of the few people who remained loyal to her was Alan Greenspan, who worked in New York as an economic consultant to Wall Street.
It's feasible in a way in which it stays down and does not just merely drop and then bounce around and have within it, in a sense, an unstable future.
In 1974, President Ford made Greenspan the chairman of his Council of Economic Advisers in Washington. It was the beginning of Greenspan's rise to power. Rand was left alone in New York, but she wasn't lonely, she said. In her philosophy, all you needed was yourself, because you were the world.
I tend to think of this whole thing as ongoing, that there is an eternity, and that we are going to be a part of that eternity, that we aren't just corpses in graves when we die.
But we aren't corpses in graves. We are not there. Don't you understand that when this life is finished, you're not there to say, oh, how terrible that I'm a corpse. No.
Well, this is true.
It's finished. And what I've always thought was a sentence from some Greek philosopher. I don't unfortunately remember who it was, that I read at 16, and it's affected me all my life. I will not die. It's the world that will end. And that's absolutely true.